Welcome to the new JFK show number 212. All right, if you've noticed, I'm in a different location, and we're going to really be doing some good video and audio production work here. We're definitely under construction. I still have my nail gun next to me. The air compressor could go off at any minute. So, all right, tonight Larry has a presentation, and I happen to have one, which I was digging through my mother's attic. And I came across all these newspapers, and I'd like to talk about them a little bit, and I'd like y'all to elaborate. And we're going to sort of go back in time, if you don't mind, okay? So at first, it's not about JFK, but then again, it really is when it comes to propagandizing the American public. All right, so this one was in her attic. This is just stuff that we believed and my mother believed wholeheartedly. So can y'all see pretty good there?
U.S. prepares for war with new kind of evil.
Right. So, of course, we know that's the 9/11 there.
Oh, that was in response to 9/11.
Right. And then
war with a new kind of evil.
Right.
We will not tire. We will not falter. We will not fail. George W. Bush, mediocrity of mediocrities.
Remember when they posted that that photo of Bin Laden, dead or alive, wanted dead or alive, you know, like in the old Wild West?
There's Bin Laden right there.
Ashcraft expands. I can't quite see it. No, move it the other way. Other way. Move it more to your right.
You're right.
To your right, Jerry.
Hourglass.
Can you see it?
Okay. Ashcraft expands power over immigrant suspect.
Right. So I guess they're getting ready to really pour it on with the Palestinians. All right. Hold on. I just dropped a few. Okay. And as we move back in time, it was actually, I'm wondering why it's not toggling back and forth, because normally I would be able to see myself big on the screen.
I don't know if you actually need the light.
Yeah. All right. So can you read that one there?
JFK Jr. to be buried at sea. Bodies found amid plane wreckage.
Yeah, we'd like to get John Hankey on that one. There's Ted Kennedy in the background. Nothing smells more than the JFK Jr. assassination.
Yeah.
We really don't talk about it like we should. And just for going back in time.
House impeaches President Clinton. House to serve until the last day of my term. What a scumbag. If you want to go after one for sexual improprieties, here was the prime candidate.
Woo, he's ready to go. And then going a little bit more back in time. Do you remember this one? Whoops.
Is that Walter Cronkite or Dan Rand? Yeah. Walter, Family Weekly. Good night, Walter.
Good night, Walter. And I found it a little interesting to me. He talked about Robert Kennedy and should he go up against LBJ. He talked about Martin Luther King, but suspiciously, no JFK discussion in this article about his great things that he did, which I thought was a little surprising. But of course, to post-war America, Walter Cronkite has been the Walt Disney of world events. Each man in his own way was as rich in reassurance, finely woven into the tones and textures of American life as the study of benevolent old uncle, a folk legend who shows up at holidays and brings presidents and slideshows.
Well, while he was the most trusted man in America, I think we have to assume he was also CIA. I mean, if you can have William Colby in 1975 testify the agency owns everyone of any significance in the media, if it began in the 1950s, you know that by 63 they had Walter in their grip. In fact, remember, when Carl Bernstein did his piece in Rolling Stone 1977, agency officials boasted that their greatest successes had been with Time Life, the New York Times, and CBS. And Walter Cronkite, of course, was CBS's anchor of all anchors.
All right. Now tell me if this paragraph doesn't take on a new meaning after knowing what we know now. Later in 1976, Cronkite persuaded Henry Kissinger, the then Secretary of State, to report on the pending success on his mission in Rhodesia, and Ian Smith accepted the majority rule of that volatile country before the agreement had been officially announced, before Kissinger had even reported back to then Gerald Ford. Now, so Gerald Ford is involved as he can possibly be.
Hold on, Gary. Hold on, Gary. I got something for you. Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Pandemonium broke out. Secret Servicemen, well trained in their job, immediately began fanning out into the crowd, looking for the assassin. Report to that shooting incident, of course, pandemonium broke out. The Secret Servicemen, well trained in their job, immediately began fanning out into the crowd, looking for the assassin. A report to that shooting incident.
Did I say more?
Yeah, he can let him say it one more time.
Okay.
Pandemonium broke out. The Secret Servicemen, well trained in their job, immediately.
Now but Larry, there is truth in here. So he was telling the truth as he was lying to us, for sure.
Well trained in their job.
Well, he's he's popping up the Secret Service men, well trained in their job, fanning out into the crowd looking for the assassin, Jim. It's exactly.
They knew how to set up JFK.
Yeah, which is
well trained. They knew exactly.
Yeah, no, and that confirms what Miss Jackson said about all the Secret Service men, surrounding the JFK limo with guns drawn and everything. So I think that was a Freudian slip.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to be going back into the 60s now. Hopefully y'all can see.
Moon. God, what a joke.
And they have a new movie about that. They have a new movie about that.
You guys are going to love this. I just did an interview with a guy who was an expert on the moon landing films, and he discovered that they were shot in a landfill in northern Arizona. Because you have all these things. There's a Corvette buried on the moon. I mean, it's just disgraceful, all the stuff he turned up.
What I found very interesting here is the person that wrote this, "Man Landing on the Moon Makes Dream of Ages True," is John Barber. Now, I wonder if that's the same John Barber that made the JFK show. So anyway,
check this out. Scott Henderson.
Oh, you are? Yeah.
The Scott Henderson, the real deal about the moon landing hoax. It's really powerful. It'll blow you away. He puts out one kind of junk after another in the what's supposed to be the moon soil, Larry. It's embarrassing.
I know. Yeah, this one's falling apart. People are it's not something that you'll lose friends over anymore, But anyway, it says Space Center, Houston, Associated Press. Man landed on the moon Sunday, July 20th, 1969. Neil A. Armstrong and Edward E. Aldrin Jr. from a planet called Earth and a nation called the United States of America will settle down upon soil no man had ever touched before. And these two men etched their names besides the great explorers of the past, brought their spaceship named Eagle down to the moon, Sea of Tranquility, after a dangerous and difficult descent from Apollo 11.
Hey, wait, if the Hubble can capture a candle on the surface of the moon, why have they not pointed the Hubble over and shown us all the camps and everything of the?
And by law, the Hubble's not allowed to look at the moon?
I agree. I believe that.
Isn't that lunatic?
You'd be able to see the buggies, the moon buggies, and all the equipment that they left behind, huh, Jim?
And the word lunatic is derivative of lunar madness.
Yes, of course.
Of
course. Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, as we move on, I found this one very interesting. I don't think you'll be able to read this one. I'll just have to maybe show you. This is actually November 22nd, before the assassination.
President and First Lady shake hands with Houstoners.
Right. So the
The
assassination.
morning edition, right?
Right. This is the morning edition, the day of the assassination, before it occurred.
Jackie's not wearing her pink pillbox hat.
That's the day before.
Day before.
Right, very good, very good.
So I just thought that was interesting that my mother kept the paper. It was probably on the newspaper, and she grabbed it as she was grabbing the real assassination newspaper. I would imagine that's what happened, you know.
It was still available, yeah.
Yeah, it was still there, so she grabbed it. This one here is, it also says the Times-Picayune, serving America's international gateway since 1837. And I'll say it once again, that not one person has ever edited the Times-Picayune that was not a graduate of Yale University and one of the 15 selected Skull and Bone members since 1837. I just thought everyone might ought to know that. And they're all in when it comes to propagandizing the American public. All right. So this one I thought was interesting. My mom picked up. It says Jack Ruby succumbs to lung blood clot. I didn't know that's what it was, you know, but.
Well, I thought it was cancer.
Yeah.
I did too. So that's just one of the things. All right, and then the last one I have, well, one before last. Okay. This is just 1 week late, you know, afterwards, and it's him and her, and it's a editorial by P. Hunt, and they're just saying the president's handshake was neither too hard or too soft. He was gracious. He sat in his rocking chair and sat on the sofa, and I would just look at him, you know, a big puff piece, just a week after the assassination, of what a great guy he was and what a sorry son of a gun Lee Harvey Oswald was. So that brings me to this. If you remember in JFK, y'all remember that some of the articles were from the States Item, and so the States Item was the other newspaper besides the Times.
What were the 10,000 students rioting for?
Let's see. Cong raid villages, slaughter civilians.
No,
so
no, that's in Africa. What's causing these are American teenagers rioting?
Boston, the estimated 10,000 college youths responding to a movie theater promotion rioted for almost 3 hours early today in the congested honky-tonk district town. Police Captain Haney, who made the crowd estimate, made the melee was out of control for a while until a hastily assembled group of more than 75 police were dispersed.
What was the movie?
I sure don't know. It doesn't say. Let's see. It has to say riots after what the poor paper's in such bad shape. It was Casino Royale.
Why would they riot over Casino Royale?
That's a Bond movie.
Bond film.
I don't know. Yeah, these things are, all right, so what it says right there next to the Hanoi article is that the CIA is mum over the possibility of Lee Oswald being an undercover agent. All right, so let me just read this and we'll get on to Larry's. All right, the United States Central Intelligence Agency has refused to comment directly on disclosures here that District Attorney Jim Garrison is seeking to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was an undercover agent aiding CIA-sponsored anti-Castro Cubans. A spokesman for the super secret espionage organization declined comment at Washington after the States Item revealed the basis of Garrison's Kennedy's death plot investigation in a copyrighted story yesterday. In Washington, the CIA source cited testimony in which his agency told the Warren Commission it had no connection with Oswald. All right, so now the States Item. The States Item reported that Garrison's office is convinced Oswald was not a communist, but an agent who worked with anti-communist Cubans in New Orleans during 1963. The story said Garrison's investigation had taken a definite trend towards what he believed are to be indications that persons employed by the CIA were responsible for Kennedy's death. Oswald was named by the Warren Commission as the sole slayer of President John Kennedy, who was shot to death in Dallas, November 2nd.
The sole slayer.
Yeah, the sole slayer. Right. So one more. All right, it said it could find no evidence that Oswald, whom it described as a confused, communist-oriented child of misfortune, acted in concert with others. Garrison's investigations of Oswald is said to center around the office building at 544 Camp Street, here, an address both used by Oswald and several avowed anti-communist organizations. The DA believed to have questioned witnesses who said they saw Oswald in the building with the late David Ferry, anti-Castro leader Sergio Arcacho Smith. Sergio, how you say it, Larry?
Sergio Arcacha Smith.
Could never said it like that ever in my whole life. A stormy one-time FBI agent whom associates have called a key government intelligence liaison man. All right, Ferry, termed one of history's most important men by Garrison, was found dead. So, thought that was
David Ferry was described as one of history's most important men by Garrison?
Garrison said that he was one of the most important people for the knowledge of this, what really happened, but he was dead.
Oh, yeah. Okay, for knowledge of what really happened, yes.
Right. Yeah. He was just a regular CIA pilot doing what he was told, you know, picking up, who was it? They Carlos Marcello brought him out of town. Now let me see if I
his identification of everyone in the country who's working for the CIA. I think we'd be appalled.
Yeah.
It's like half the population.
Yeah, they do have more. Let's see what they say.
Well, David Ferry wasn't just any pilot or anything like that. He was involved, in the cancer experiments over there at his apartment where Judith worked, and he was involved in arms smuggling, and he was involved in flying operatives all over the country and even into Canada.
Yeah, let me tell you something. He was a pilot for Eastern Airlines. So you can't be just some schmuck flying jet airliners around the place. Of course, he lost.
He drives to Houston, on the day of the assassination with two of his gay friends, and supposedly hangs out there waiting for a phone call where obviously he was supposed to hook up with somebody and fly somebody out of the country. So David Ferry, and if you read Judith's book, Ferry, you'll find out a lot more about him. And I also have to say that Harold Weisberg and his repository also kept just an incredible trove of documents on David Ferry. So,
yeah, awesome. All right, so it says CIA is silent on Oswald Link is the headline in the second page. He says he was found dead in his apartment on Louisiana Avenue Parkway apartment on February 22nd, 5 days after the Garrison inquiry became public. So we all went there. If you go to
yes, we did.
Larry and Dr. Fetzer on the road with Dr. Fetzer was the name of that show. All right,
and also Gary, photos later on surfaced of Ferry and Oswald, in different settings. So
yeah, they knew who they were. There's no doubt about it. Okay, Arcacha is a fugitive from the Garrison investigation. The DA has also charged the former New Orleans resident with complicity in the mysterious disappearance of explosives from a Homa munitions dump in 1961. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, my father worked for Schlumberger, and those ammunitions were in the Schlumberger bunker, and it was David Ferry along with E. Howard Hunt that broke in there and got all the ammunitions out. You see, because Schlumberger is an offshore well provider. They do services for offshore wells. So they're going way out into the ocean, and they pull up next to boats and they drop the big old toolbox off, and they may not even know what was in it. Now, I don't know if my father ever had any idea about that, but when they're talking about this, that is Schlumberger. And I used to be a kid, and my dad would go to Schlumberger to pick up oil field tools. And I know that that is where it happened, at the weapons dump. Okay, Arcacha. How you say it again, Larry?
Arcacha Smith.
Arcacha is free at Dallas on $1,500 bail. Bannister, who died of a heart attack in 1964, was operating a detective agency in the weathered granite building which stand by the corner of Camp and Lafayette. Oswald, who appeared to be active in pro-Cuban activities here during the summer of '63, used the building's address on pamphlets he handed out for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a left-wing organization. Later, he overprinted the leaflets and changed the address. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Investigation agent and a former agent who inquired into New Orleans phases of the Kennedy assassination in 1963 were subpoenaed to appear before the New Orleans grand jury next week. A subpoena was served yesterday afternoon on FBI man Regis Kennedy, who interrogated Ferry when one of the airline pilots was picked up by Garrison's office. All right, I'm sorry. Interrogated Ferry when the one-time airline pilot was picked up by Garrison's office 3 days after the president's murder. The agent who was served at the FBI field office here refused to comment on whether he will honor the subpoena. Boy, that's the only time you didn't have to really worry about a subpoena. All right, a second subpoena was issued for Warren Debris. Yeah, 4827 Michoud Boulevard, whose name appears frequently on the assassination investigation records in the National Archives.
Yeah, we did a show on Debris and Orestes Peña, remember, some time ago, based on the new documents that came out in the latest release, where Orestes Peña, the owner and the operator of the Havana bar, stated that he saw all of these FBI and other agents with Lee Oswald repeatedly hanging out, having coffee, breakfast, meeting here, meeting there. And so,
in Baton Rouge yesterday, Governor John McKithen charged that his office is not receiving full cooperation from the governor of Ohio in his efforts to return fugitive witness Gordon Novell.
Yeah.
Well, boy,
and also Warren Debris, goes to Dallas before the assassination, Gary. We pointed that out. And then after the assassination, he disappears into South America. We never see or hear from him again, at all until I believe in the late 70s when he was interviewed by the HSCA.
Yeah, talking about Novell, it says Garrison has accused the 29-year-old former New Orleanian bar owner of conspiring with Ferry and Arcadia to burglarize an all-field company explosive dump, and that's where the Slumberjay, where my father worked. The DA has called Novell a very important witness in the Kennedy assassination. Novell, also charged by Terrebonne Parish authorities with burglarizing the munitions dump, and is free on $10,000 bond. So there you go. That's just one article on one day in the Times-Picayune. In fact, what was it? It was, this is the state's item, May 6, 1967.
And also, Gary and Jim, let's not forget that Ferry also interacted with Mary Sherman and Dr. Oshner in that the whole weaponizing of the biological weapon.
Yeah.
Boy, if you just read it.
That article seemed to have more accurate facts and truth than we're used to anymore. I mean, you can't get that much accuracy, I think, from anything in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, you're right. It sounded like a book from a JFK writer. It's what it sounded like.
Sounded like the reporter knew what they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really think they do, because Times-Picayune, they were, the whole story. I mean, look, if Times-Picayune's run by Skull and Bones, well, you think the state side are run by a bunch of nuns? I doubt it. So, but they were spilling out the facts, trying to, I guess, they were prepared.
Local paper.
Yeah, local paper, spelling it out on a daily basis almost. So when
good stuff, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say to Larry?
Yeah, what you got, Larry?
Well, we started with that Kittrell story, I think last month or something like that, and we started to read off the original manuscript, and it's a long and tedious process. It's a 90-page manuscript. It's hard to, keep people's attention, for that long. So I figured I'd do a
synopsis.
A synopsis of the whole thing, and I did, and And it has to do a lot with Larry Crafard. Now, Larry Crafard is a very interesting and enigmatic character in the whole assassination thing. And I'll just give the audience a brief history of this guy. He came out of the Army. I believe he was Army intelligence at one time. And I even have a copy of his discharge records, and I'm going to show it on the screen in a minute. And he happens to hook up with Jack Ruby at the State Fair, working on the carousels there in Dallas. And then Ruby hires him and brings him over to the Carousel Club, and he starts living there in the back of the bar there, in a little he's bunking there back there in a little room that Ruby had there. And he gets to meet, and interact with a lot of the women that Ruby had working for him there. And it's very strange that on the day of the assassination, he disappeared. He's nowhere to be found. And Penn Jones had his ideas of where Crafard was. And it's a very interesting story, because Crafard, his name was not actually Crafard with an A, it was Crawford, okay? And it seems like in the whole story of the JFK assassination, they renamed him as Larry Crafard, when in reality his name was Crawford. And he was out of Michigan, and right after the assassination, he disappeared, and he hitchhiked all the way back to Michigan and stayed with his sister for a while. And the investigators in the FBI were looking for him, obviously, because they knew that he had been, with Ruby, and he had interacted with Ruby, and he had been with Ruby. And so in this whole scheme, going back to why this is important, is because Laura Kittrell actually identifies him as one of the men impersonating Lee Oswald at the Texas Employment Commission. So without any further ado, I'm just going to do a quick screen share here, and that's sort of like the segue into the story. And we'll let Jim take over here. First of all, let me show you guys this. This is, can you see this?
Sure.
Yeah, this is from the Midlothian Mirror, and this was published by
Penn
Jones, right? And we'll just cover this real quick. Let me move this over here, and this is where Penn Jones actually denounced this guy. They're looking for him all over the place. He's disappeared. Okay, and you want to read this? I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Larry Crawford. While taping a second JFK TV show in Chicago last week, we were asked if Oswald did not kill Officer Tippit, who did, and we went blank. For the life of us, the name Larry Crawford would not come out. For the rest of that 30-minute show, we struggled unsuccessfully. Now we want to bring his name. It's the opinion of this editor, Larry Crawford was one of the two gunmen who shot Officer J.D. Tippit. Crawford fitted the description given by most of the witnesses. Only two witnesses claimed the Tippit killer was Oswald. Crawford was missing for several hours that day. He was living at the Carousel Club and left Dallas 2 days later, about the time Ruby was killing Oswald. Crawford's testimony is that of a trained agent. If the question was important, Crawford could remember nothing. If it was a trivial question, Crawford remembered every minute detail. The evidence points toward Crawford's escape after shooting Tippit by going into a church, but the police instead searched a branch library. Chicago, we're sorry we could not recall his name. Whoever you are, little punk Crawford, if you are still alive, come forward. If you are not, guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty wild there, and so
anyway, I don't think I'd heard his being identified as a shooter of Tippit.
Yeah. It's but here, this is his discharge from the Army. As you can see up here, it's Crawford, okay, Laverne, okay, and this is the over here, the DD Form 257A. In under honorable conditions. If you go and you look at this, this has to do with some kind of unstable mental situation with the man. Okay, and basically they discharged him because they thought that he might have been a little bit crazy. But you know, then again, these are the ideal operatives that you want to, you know, recruit, and when you have something like this going on. And so I thought that this was very interesting. And he Portland, Oregon, and that's where he ends up in. And you know. So, but basically, what I wanted to show you here is let me stop the share, and then go back to what how this all ties into the Laura Kittrell story. And let me, where are you guys? Okay, here you go. Okay, here. All right, we're ready. Oops.
Laura Kittrell, Larry Crafard, and Lee Oswald. In the months leading up to the JFK assassination, some very strange incidents involving Lee Oswald, or men who were impersonating him, occurred at the Texas Employment Commission in Dallas. Laura Kittrell worked for 30 years for the TEC. What is known as the Kittrell manuscript was part of the HSCA documents, Deep Six by the HSCA. John Armstrong used some of her story in his book, Harvey and Lee. He later posted the manuscript at his repository at Baylor University in Box 4, Notebook 4B.
Let me
had the conversation with him, Larry?
Yeah, apparently it's been removed, but go ahead. I'm sorry?
I mean, this is the very woman we did this show about before. Where Lee
well, we started, we only covered about 5 or 6 pages of her manuscript. And this is a synopsis of her story. And that's,
okay. This is an amazing story, a very brave woman who was in a position to know and find out many things about the JFK assassination. Kittrell tried her best to bring out the truth about Lee Oswald being impersonated in the months leading up to the assassination at the Texas Employment Commission. Her 90-page manuscript, which contains her recollections, is enhanced by Gayton Fonzie's 10-page interview for the HSCA dated July 18, 1978. Located at the end of the document. Given the time between her manuscript and her interview in 1978, it must be stated that her powers of recollection were outstanding. This is why the FBI and later Blakey did not want to touch her with a 10-foot pole. This was a witness who could overturn the proverbial apple cart. Fascinating all by itself. The enigmatic Larry Crawford, Crawford. Where do we start with Crawford? To begin with, the name Crafard, which was used in the Warren Commission, is not the correct spelling of his name. His Army records show his correct name is Crawford.
Yeah, we already showed this document, but I wanna bring this one up because this is what Penn Jones Jr. was talking about, and this is an interview that William Boxley, did on October the 20th, 2 October 1968, where they actually tracked this guy down. Okay, and very, very interesting because this is where the impression that Boxley had of this individual had that he was an operative of some sort, that he was an agent. Okay, and if you want to sort of go ahead and read this out.
Larry Crafard's entire testimony is textbook quality for any intelligence services course in resistance to interrogation. It's a classic in the art of selective recall. Attached are a few examples of facets which fascinate me in his testimony, although all 200 pages of it are full of them. On the whole, Crafard seems extremely sharp at detecting and avoiding the nuances of Hubert's questions. His handling of the English language is nothing less than expert for a lad who barely compiled 3 years of high school, who was given a general honorable conditions discharge out of the Army from Germany after 13-month service in 1959, when H.O.W. Balkelman was leaving Germany for an intelligence assignment in the U.S., etc. Crafard is able to remember job details in his past, which no other itinerant I've ever known could recall. At the same time, he appeared able to anticipate Hubert's heading into an area where a memory blackout would seem beneficial to him. That's rather remarkable. Yeah. Crafard, on the whole, Crafard appears to me to be traveling in the offbeat church league, perhaps as a courier or better. He refers to his church several times in the testimony and once identifies it as the General Assembly and Church of the Firstborn in Dallas. Naturally, no such church is listed in the 1963 Dallas telephone directory. He hits all the key spots in his travels, from West Coast, Washington, to Long Beach, to Dallas, to Memphis. He seems to maintain fantastic communications for a drifter, relying only on what friends write, relatives who write to him.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
Memphis at the time of 1968, Jim, I think that's,
It's like he's telepathic.
Hubert
recalls recesses and sign go off the record at 2 or 3 key points in the testimony, but overall Crafard has to pull Hubert out of more holes than Hubert does Crafard. For example, when Griffin asks of Union Drilling Company's predecessors, were they Michigan companies or were they people? Crafard rescues him with a quick Michigan companies, period. And Griffin recesses until the next day, last page of volume 13. What Crafard's role may have been is impossible to speculate, but on the fact of his testimony, it appears at least as interesting as Jack Lawrence's. And of course, Jack identifies the shooter from inside the triple underpass.
I misstated when I said earlier that Boxley tracked him down. What Boxley is doing here is analyzing his Warren Commission testimony.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
He actually was unaccounted for during the morning of the assassination until God knows when in the afternoon, for there's only his word and possibly of Andy Armstrong, Jack Ruby's faithful slave. And one of the most unbelievable elements of his testimony covers a period of 1 to 3:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, November 23rd, when he allegedly kept the phone tied up talking to a female he'd never seen or heard of before. Could this have been a cover to have accounted for the telephone having been busy that length of time in case reporters or others might have tried to call Ruby and learned it was busy while Ruby was supposed to have been out of the club? We don't really know. Rick Crafard was all day and most Friday night, not November 22nd. He got away before he could be questioned by any Dallas police or newsmen, and he did not surface until the FBI talked with him in Michigan on Thanksgiving Day.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, his hitchhiking toward Florida from Clare, Michigan, and being picked up by an unknown benefactor who gave him lodging and a job right there in Michigan until the Ruby trial is to Horatio Alger. And then he gets mixed up on why he went back to Dallas in time for the
Ruby
trial. Right.
Yeah. So obviously this guy is a very, very, I think, important individual who has never really been analyzed. And that's where the Kittrell
needs to connect a whole lot of loose ends. I mean, this
and Jim, the thing about him being in Memphis in '68, at the time of the King thing, I mean, I know I might be reaching here.
Yeah.
That's, okay. But anyway, here are some notes of the Kittrell document.
Laura Kittrell, here are some notes. There was a concerted effort by Hoover and the FBI to discredit her exactly the way they tried to do with Shirley Martin. This is a sure sign of her veracity and truthfulness. She was not a quack. She had to reconstruct her conversation with the principals because she was conveniently away the Friday of the assassination, where she was supposed to attend the luncheon at the Trade Mart. All records had already been confiscated by the time she came back the following Monday. In 3 different sessions, he spent hours interviewing, testing, and speaking to Oswald.
And Oswald.
Yeah. Tried to blow the whistle by writing RFK, but was referred to the FBI, Fox guarding the chicken coop. Positively identified Larry Crafard, Curtis L. Crawford, as the loud biker type, Teamster talking man she interviewed as Oswald. Crafard was from Michigan, a hotbed for Teamster activity. Crafard at one point knocked a flower vase off on her desk in a fit of rage. Probably means off her desk. He told her he had worked at the Texas State Fair, Fonzie interview pages 1 and 6, where he met Jack Ruby, who immediately employed him as a handyman. Now that's just too circumstantial.
Yeah.
You meet a guy and you immediately hire him as a handyman.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem with this is that Lee Oswald has never been placed at the Texas State Fair. He had met and worked with Mary Chotiner pronounced Schottner, ex-aide of Nixon in Florida.
Yeah, we examined this. Yeah, before.
Especially with
yeah,
my guy McKinsey, Rod McKinsey.
Yeah, exactly.
It always reminds me of.
Go ahead, Gary.
I was just saying, it reminds me of Rod McKinney, you know, the guy talking about being in church and all that, where Rod McKinney was on at fairs and festivals and stuff.
Wasn't he a fun guy to have as a guest?
Yeah, it was two great shows.
About Murray Chotiner. Chotiner is mentioned as an employment reference by a colored woman who sees Kittrell in early October 1963. She remarks she worked for him as a maid, and he's a big man out there, a gangster. The Teamster guy is hanging out with hearing distance with two other people, and after the colored woman leaves, he comments about Chotiner. He scolds him for repeating privileged and private information. He slams his palm on her desk and tips over the small vase with flowers and expresses, "I'll just be damned," twice, and leaves. The beginning of creating a false aura of violent behavior, even over insignificant things. Yeah, that's probably right. This suggests Lee Oswald had a hair trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Teamster man comes back in a referral from a Mrs. Elrod to get him re-interviewed due to a mistake in his claim. She asks him about Chotiner, and he remarks he's a crook using a southern accent. Was incredulous that this Oswald could not drive a car. Was incredulous that Oswald had not worked for Chotiner. On page 22, while she's interviewing him, a Cuban man walks in asking for direction. After she does so in her Tex-Mex Spanish, she remarks that her Spanish is not that bad. The conversation turns to how many languages he can speak, and he makes sure she knows he also speaks Russian. The conversation turns into politics as he asks her about Batista, etc. She thinks his wife is Cuban. Cannot pinpoint his duties in Minsk. He ends up not believing his story about Russia. He makes sure she knows he has an undesirable discharge from the Marines. I felt that I knew several things about him for sure now. They'd worked in California for Murray Chotiner, that his wife was a Cuban, and that he had not been to Russia. Whereas, of course, Lee had been to Russia and had married the niece of the KGB.
ETI Realty is a company.
Yeah, ETI Realty, she writes in his file about his previous employment above, but notes the place as Murray Chotiner Investment Company when she realizes it's ETI Realty and tries to correct it. The file has already been picked up. A notation disappears along with the file. So that's got to be a key connection there that's never been suitably.
Yeah. The Kittrell document is a fascinating manuscript, and it requires.
Sounds like it, Larry.
Yeah.
But he leaves. She is left with the impression he's a liar and possibly even a murderer. A messenger job in California on a motor scooter at 16, he tries to scam her into a white-collar office job. The FBI tries to establish that Chotiner did not exist. My God, he was a very prominent guy.
Yeah, worked for Nixon.
Realizes the ETC documents of the Warren Commissioner from 1962 and that the work done in the fall of 1963 is not there. Was perplexed to meet the same Teamster guy, more polite, military acting, clean looking, intelligent Oswald, who also happened to know Murray Chotiner. President Kennedy will find out. He'll find out. Love to talk about guns and marksmanship. Talked about shooting classifications in DD 214 from marksman to sharpshooter to expert, which are, of course, the three classifications in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. Turns to his reading habits, where he tells her he likes to read James Bond, and the president does the same. Then he offers he likes to read Karl Marx. Tells her he'd like to be a sharpshooter and pronounces well as whale. Companion wife looks Spanish and spoke Spanish, did not look like Marina. Strange call number one. The housekeeper didn't know what to make of this. The housekeeper answered Kittrell's phone call. When she asked for Mr. Oswald, the housekeeper is confused and refers to a Mr. Lee, which of course would be right.
That's where she calls one of the numbers that's in the file that this supposed Oswald left as a contact.
Right. The housekeeper didn't know what to make of this. The housekeeper answered Kittrell's phone call when she asked for Mr. Oswald. The housekeeper is confused and returns to a Mr. Lee. Kittrell then asks to speak to his wife, and she answers they don't live together. A confused Kittrell backs off and hangs up. This could be a clear path to Ruby. If Crafard provided Mr. Lee's boarding house telephone number to Kittrell. Perhaps it came from Ruby. Strange call number 2. Ruth Payne called her to advise LHO had already secured a job at the TSBD. When she asked to talk to his wife in Spanish, Payne laughed and advised his wife was Russian, from Russia, and spoke only Russian.
That's a very strange situation there, because obviously Kittrell is under the assumption that, you know, the Oswald, who she knows has been coming to the TEC, is a Spanish-speaking woman. And then when
was married to a Spanish-speaking woman.
Yeah.
Well, Ruth is being CIA is wanting to promote his Russian connections.
Mm-hmm.
Later, she shows how dismayed she was that the commission never confronted her with Marina to confirm her story about the people in his company the first day. Same with Robert Oswald. I must say that my doubt that he was Oswald is enormous. I am satisfied that if he was not Oswald, then there was somebody pretending to be Oswald. Now, that's why they don't want to talk to her. They want to conceal that they had people impersonating Lee Oswald, because then it's obviously a conspiracy being run by the government.
No, and a Oswald who is belligerent, loud, you know, talking about guns, you know.
Knocking a vase off. I mean, that's very
you know,
extreme to knock a vase off of a secretary's desk.
Yeah,
So,
all deliberate.
You will remember that person forever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree.
Describes Crawford's appearance, hair, etc. Specifically shows how important it was that it be known that Oswald had joined the Teamsters, even though supposedly he could not drive. That is quite a contradiction.
Yeah.
While still at the TEC, she met and interviewed one Tom Bowden, who had worked as a janitor at the Texas Theater in the early 60s and was there for many years. His cleaning duties were early in the morning before opening time. Bowden told her how the DPD searched the empty Texas Theater on 11/22/63 before the assassination occurred. That is pretty damn interesting. He was positive about this because they interfered with his duties that morning. In 1965, he met and interviewed Eva Grant, whose unemployment benefits had expired and could not find a job in Dallas because she was Ruby's sister, not even with Jewish employers. After a while, she lost track of her. Happened to see pictures of Crafard from the Warren Commission and had this eureka moment as she realized what had happened. The Teamster biker type turned out to be Larry Crafard. Discussion. It's quite evident from Kittrell's account that the real Lee Harvey Oswald never set foot in the TEC in October 1963. The official Warren Commission records placed him there in October 1962. According to Kittrell, he was impersonated there in the fall of 1963 by Larry Crafard, who made his best effort to paint him as a violent and hateful man who loved guns, was capable of murder, was a Teamster, and was out to kill Kennedy. He also spoke at times with an accent which was not Oswald. I believe this was the actual plan A, to make Oswald look like a lunatic in a public state institution, ranting about Kennedy, talking about Cuba and Batista, talking about being a sharpshooter, Russia, Karl Marx, etc. However, when Laura Kittrell got accidentally involved in the Oswald referral and being as thorough as she normally was in her job with 30 years experience, she created a paper trail, made some very important notations in the file regarding Crawford's employment at 16 as a messenger boy in California, working for Mary Chotiner, a close aide and collaborator of Richard Nixon. The Chotiner account is extremely important. It suggests that Crawford may have overplayed his role with Kittrell, gotten sloppy, and given information he was not supposed to give. Even though she repeatedly writes that she erred when she wrote in his file about Chotiner, because Crawford did not explicitly admit he'd worked for him, only ETI Realty, she was left with the impression that he had worked for Chotiner in Encino, California. Clearly, Crawford was not supposed to give this information. Once the FBI confiscated the TEC records the weekend of the assassination, and see how the FBI is covering up again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
With the inference being that all roads now led to Chotiner and hence Nixon, the tainted Oswald file would never see the light of day. Moreover, she caught him lying about details of his supposed life in Russia, the deaf woman who accompanied him the first day, and other details that led her to believe this was indeed a setup. Employment Commission counselors are trained to spot liars and conmen due to the high rate of benefits fraud being committed. Furthermore, and in her particular case, she was able to glean information about the assassination that others would not normally have access to. Two cases in point are that Eva Grant and Tom Bowden incidents mentioned above. Another item to consider has to be why they wanted to involve the Teamsters Union in this. At the time, Jimmy Hoffa was president of the Teamster, and over the years his name has come up as a possible conspirator in the assassination of JFK. Was this a fallback scenario? In case A, Oswald was killed as planned at the TSBD or Texas Theater, or B, the Lone Nut case would not hold and a conspiracy had to be declared. Win-win. The Payne phone call provides further confirmation that Ruth and Michael were very deeply involved in setting up Oswald. When Kittrell finds out from Payne it's the TSBD's working at, she immediately sees red flags and wonders how this could have happened. She has deep roots in Dallas and knows the Ross Carlton family, who owned the company until a year before the assassination, as one of those Dallas vigilante groups a little to the right of the John Birch Society. Moreover, she had vast experience with the TSBD Human Resources Department and personally knew how strict and picky they were about prospective employees. That's very interesting all by itself.
Important right there.
In her mind and from her experience, the Oswald she dealt with at the TEC in '63 was a person the TSBD would never have hired.
Never hired, exactly.
What immediately comes to mind here is the Billy Lovelady affair and the double standard that was applied.
No, you right here. In the past, they had given her hard time.
In the past, they'd given her a hard time about this, which is why she clearly remembered their attitude when dealing with dishonorable discharges. In her mind and from her experience, the Oswald she dealt with at the TEC in '63 was a person the TSBD would never have hired.
Yeah.
That's all really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And from a woman who was in the know. And what's so amazing is that on the day of the assassination, she was at the Trade Mart of all places, Jim.
So the circumstantial evidence of conspiracy and setup is just from this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
What immediately comes to mind here is the Billy Lovelady affair and the double standard that was applied. As a running felon, Billy Nolan Lovelady started working at DSBD on December 16, 1961, while they were still located at the Daltex building. More than a year later, January 7, 1963, he was arrested there by the FBI after he skipped town in Maryland on a gun theft and illegal sale of arms conviction and subsequent court-martial and dishonorable discharge at Andrews Air Force Base. In Lovelady's case, the TSBD arranged to pay his bond and balance of the money he owed from the fines he defaulted on in Maryland. All this would have qualified Lovelady as a possible patsy, depending on the circumstances of November 22nd. More layers of the onion keep peeling away. Brian Burden wrote in the continuing inquiry that Crafard's movements coincidentally mirrored Lee Oswald's in 1962-63. A huge question mark that remains is why were Oswald's Texas Employment Commission 1962 records not used by and shown to Laura Kittrell in 1963? She only knew these existed when she read the Warren Commission and found them there as Cunningham Exhibit number 4. Why did the TEC start from scratch and open up a new claims file when one already existed, which had been closed after he began to work at Jaggers in 1962? Dishonorable discharges and her courts-martial, Lee Oswald, Larry Crafard, Billy Lovelady. Fascinating stuff, Larry.
Yeah. And, she was, wow. And I think that more people need to study her manuscript and also Gaten Fonzie's analysis of her manuscript because he interviewed her and he had his own ideas.
See, here's one of the truthful, honest people caught up in the web of deceit and deception whose testimony has to be suppressed, distorted, or simply disappeared.
Yeah, and this Larry Crawford obviously is with the circumstances where obviously he completely disappeared off the face of the earth, and we never heard from him again. He was never interviewed and never investigated in any way, and he actually resemble Lee somewhat, at least physically. And he had a very strange tick. You know, he used to his eyes. He would blink his eyes in a way. Yeah. They were very, very.
Thing.
Yeah.
A tick, as it were.
A tick. You know, people that do that. And so it was very noticeable.
And that's not true of Lee at all. So, I mean, that would be another distinguishing characteristic.
Right. And so, and that he's unaccounted for. And as you can see, that Penn Jones had his own idea of where he was at right after the assassination with the situation with Tippit. And also there was a guy by the name of Igor Baganov, and this is Vincent Salandria's theory. He sent me a whole dossier on Baganov. He investigated him, and he believed that he was also one of the guys that shot Tippit that day. And so
Crawford.
No, Baganov. He was
Crawford and Baganov.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Tell me more about the Baganov.
Now, Baganov was I believe, Ukrainian guy who came to the U.S. and he worked for General Electric in Philadelphia. And on the weekend of the assassination, or the week before, apparently he fell in love with this young girl, teenage girl, and he drives down to Dallas and he sort of kidnaps the girl. And he disappears, and then he's driving, I believe, this red Thunderbird or something like that. I'd have to look into my files. And he is actually in the same area, the vicinity of the Tippit assassination, and he is identified by, I'm not sure who, but some of the guys that were there that saw one of the men who escaped after Tippit's assassination, and he positively identified this Baganov guy.
Really?
Yeah. Now we'd have to do a show one of these days because
we can do more on Tippit. Yeah, the Tippit shooting.
Yeah. The Baganov story is fascinating, also, Jim. It's
And I think that Gary had a good idea of doing something about JFK Jr.
Yeah. You know, they had to unstrap the pilot. That's why. They needed all this time to find the wreckage, and get the pilot out of the plane.
I'm telling you, John Hankey has a fantastic documentary. He is one of the leading.
Yeah, I saw it. I love that documentary. That's where I'm telling you what I know about this, because it's from John.
Well, let's line him up, Gary.
All right, that's easy to do. I talk to him all the time. Now, I'd like to do something on air here, fellas.
Sure.
I've been wearing my hat here with the Illuminati symbol on it. So I'd like to take my permanent marker here and X it out.
You're blacking it out?
Yep.
All right. Don't let your table tilt.
Yeah, no pyramid.
And no religion too, huh?
That's right. No pyramid on the forehead of Gary King. That's for sure. So we'll leave it at that. All right, fellas. We just got a little bit of time left. I think we had a great show. Any final thoughts?
Go ahead.
I think we got two great future shows in mind here. One about Tippit, where Larry's filling me in about the shooters, which have fascinated me forever. I mean, I know the basics because we had two different shooters. They're both using semi-automatics that eject shell casings. The first officer on the scene initialed them. There were two Remington Rand and two Western, implying or suggesting rather strongly two different shooters. When they eventually made a substitution and replaced them with revolver cartridges, there were three of one make, one of the other, and they no longer had the initials of the arresting officer. Aquila Clemens seems to have been spot on here, but they used that woman, Helen Markham.
Markham, yeah. I wanted to add, Jim, that Vince told me that he actually ran down Baganov, and he went and he confronted him with Benavides. Okay, and when Benavides saw him, he just freaked out, So, and he wouldn't tell him that's him, because obviously what had happened to his brother. Okay, so, but it's something that's we can work out a show because it's fascinating.
Let's go to work on that, Larry, and let's next week do JFK Jr. with Hankey.
Let's do that. All right, one quick question before we go. All right, there is a plaque on the moon with 4 signatures, 3 astronauts, and 1 other person. Can you name it?
Well, they got a new movie that's coming out on
Probably
that.
going to be Richard Nixon. I mean, you know, tricky dick, but the whole thing was fraudulent. As I was saying, check out The Real Deal with Scott Henderson on the moon landing hoax, because it was filmed in a landfill in northern Arizona. You'll be dumbfounded.
Yeah, just Richard Nixon alone should tell you a lot right there. So, all right, JFK.
153news.net if you want to find The Real Deal.
Yeah, you got it. It's Gus Chambers is putting them up left and right. All right, fellas, JFK 212 from my new hideaway and video audio production center. We'll be seeing you soon with new documentaries.